Welcome to Tangled Up in Poetry. Today we're going to be analysing Away Melancholy by Stevie Smith. Stevie Smith was born in 1902 and died in 1971. She was writing mostly around the 30s and 40s and 50s. I think her first collection of poetry was published in 1937, where she was reflecting on some of the profound impact that World War One had had on Britain and the world. This poem is titled Away Melancholy. Now, melancholy is the archaic word, I suppose, for depression, really. Nowadays, we call this feeling depression. Traditionally, it has been known as melancholy, sadness, the blues, feeling upset, feeling down in the dumps, generally feeling unhappy about ourselves or the world we live in, and not feeling positive in our spirits. Okay, let's read the poem all the way through. Away melancholy, away with it, let it go. Are not the trees green, the earth as green? Does not the wind blow, fire leap, and rivers flow? Away melancholy. The ant is busy, he carrieth his meat. All things hurry, to be eaten or eat. Away melancholy. Man too hurries, eats, couples, berries. He is an animal also, with a hey-ho melancholy. Away with it, let it go. Man of all creatures is superlative, away melancholy. He of all creatures alone raiseth a stone, away melancholy. Into the stone the god pours what he knows of good, calling good God. Away melancholy, let it go. Speak not to me of tears, tyranny, pox, wars, saying, can God stone a man's thoughts be good? Say rather, it is enough that the stuffed stone of man's good, growing by man's called God. Away melancholy, let it go. Man aspires to good, to love, sighs. Beaten, corrupted, dying, in his own blood lying, yet heaves up an eye above, cries, love, love. It is his virtue needs explaining, not his failing. Away melancholy, away with it, let it go. Right, so as you can see from the first impression of the poem, it's one of the longer poems in this anthology, and it's at first glance quite tricky to understand, but hopefully as we break it down now, you'll see that the message is quite clear. Okay, so the title of the poem is repeated throughout the poem, all the way through, in the form of a refrain, which is away with it, let it go, away melancholy. So this becomes a kind of song-like hymn or chant or mantra. So she starts off by actually personifying melancholy and casting it off. She's willing it away with the effort of her words, and she's asking herself, and perhaps anyone reading, to let it go. Now, of course, this is much easier said than done when you're feeling depressed or unhappy. It's not the best advice always to just be told, cheer up, don't worry about it. But what we could perhaps do is acknowledge that unhappiness, depression, melancholy, sadness, these kind of negative emotions are part of life and necessary, really, if we're going to be able to feel happiness and joy and more positive emotions. You can't really have one without the other. So then the first stanza, or the first kind of main stanza, she talks about the four elements: fire, wind, earth, and water. And she is perhaps encouraging us to take inspiration and positivity from nature. She talks about the trees are being green, the wind blowing, and the rivers flowing. So you've got these sort of powerful verbs here of blowing, flowing, fire leaping. And so the powerful verbs are perhaps symbolic of the energy in life and the energy that's required for ourselves to pick ourselves up when we're feeling low. Also, perhaps she's suggesting that when we are feeling low and unhappy, depressed, melancholic, we are sort of unable to see the beauty that is all around us. And often we're surrounded by nature, we are part of nature, and perhaps we're kind of blinded to that truth and we don't really see and take in the natural world. And once we do acknowledge this beauty that's all around us, perhaps we sort of see the world through a more positive lens and we are a bit less detached from it. She then compares humans to ants. And this is quite an interesting contrast because ants, when you look at an ant on the floor, it looks very weak, doesn't it, in comparison to the powerful human. You could step on an ant, you could crush it with your shoe, if you were very cruel. But she's looking at the ant and she's saying, let's look at this little creature working in a team and carrying its food, and it has purpose, it has drive, it's motivated, it's strong. And if a little ant can continue on its life in a positive manner, then surely we can, with all the power that we have as humans. I like the way she uses the word carrieth here, because she's using this sort of archaic word, this old-fashioned word, carrieth. And I think she does this quite a few times throughout the poem. She sort of throws in these words, and I think it's her way of being kind of humorous and suggesting that, you know, if you laugh at life in a more light-hearted way, perhaps that will also encourage you to feel better about your experience. So this refrain, which is a kind of like a chorus line from a song, sort of a repeated section of the poem that gives the central message of the poem. In this case, it's the title of the poem too, Away, Melancholy. So she's talking to melancholy. That's why you've got that directive comma after the word away. She's actually dismissing melancholy. She's going, shoo, shoo, get away. I don't need you around here anymore. And yeah, it becomes a kind of mantra in the song, becomes a kind of way of living and a little reminder to herself and perhaps the readers that you can take control and have power over these negative feelings. And here we see the comparison to man with the ants. So man also is busy, hurrying along. We also eat, we couple, we die and get buried, and we're also animals. So perhaps it's a little reminder that we are a product of nature and not detached from it. Nature can be quite therapeutic if we acknowledge that we are part of it. Humans are also animals, and they have instincts and simple joys to fill their lives with. And then she again throws in this kind of humorous, jolly, musical hey-ho in the fourth line. It reminds me of that song in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's like, hey-ho, hey-ho, it's off to work we go. I'm not sure if she's actually referencing this. Perhaps she is. I'm not sure if that song was around in her time. But it's the same phrase, and it's really interesting that she uses this to refer to melancholic, because how can it's incongruous that melancholy can be referred to in this sort of jolly way. So again, I think she's subverting what we normally think of in melancholic feeling and trying to encourage us to take joy from it in some way, or mock it or insult it and laugh at it. And if we're able to do that, that's quite a good defense against the feeling that it creates in us. She talks about man of all creatures is superlative. So if we are superlative, meaning the best or the highest or the greatest, then surely we should be able to rid ourselves of sorrow. If a little ant can do it, then why can't we? Then we see this parenthesis, away melancholy, he of all creatures alone raiseth a stone. So here we could interpret an illusion. The Bible story suggests that Jesus, when he was reincarnated, removed an enormous stone from the entrance to his cave, and he emerged from the cave reborn and reinvigorated and with new life. So perhaps what Stevie Smith is suggesting here is that melancholic feeling or depression is a kind of moment that we can be reborn from. And once we rid ourselves of the feeling and we naturally come to a more positive outlook on life. So perhaps she is suggesting that we too can be reborn. And every day we're kind of reborn. Every time we experience a new emotion, it's a rebirth of our energy and our spirit. And so it's a sort of hope in moments of despair, moments of desperation, moments of unhappiness. There will always be a rebirth when you're not feeling like that. Also, the mention of stone here, we've sort of got this sort of texture of something strong and concrete, and perhaps that's again a reference to the strength that we all exhibit without actually realizing it from one day to the next. So here, when she talks about God, she's actually conflating two ideas. She's conflating the word good with the word God. And she says, man pours what he knows of good, calling good God. Now, my interpretation here is that she is suggesting that if you are not religious and you don't believe in God, which in sort of 30s and 40s was happening quite a lot in the Western world. People had sort of lost their faith in religion at that time. Before that, it was kind of mainstream to be part of the church. And in this kind of era, reason and science and sort of a more sort of pragmatic approach to life was emerging as the technological and industrial revolution had really started to accelerate. And so what she's perhaps suggesting here is that if you do not have a spiritual guide that you find in a religious membership, you could find the same spiritual strength from the goodness of humanity, which I find quite appealing, because everywhere you look, okay, there are terrible things happening around the world and there are evil people out there. But in addition to that, there's a lot of goodness going on that we perhaps don't read about in the headlines of newspapers, and we often overlook. Generally, I think this poem is reminding us of the goodness that people can exude, and that we can actually find a lot of hope and spiritual guidance in that goodness in other people. She then talks about these sort of horrific things in the world: tyranny, pox, wars. And now these tyranny is kind of means dictatorship, evil, oppression. Pox is smallpox, so disease, and of course wars that are going on and have been going on for ever since you can remember, really. So again, there are lots of terrible things in the world that will likely make us melancholic and sad, and that is absolutely understandable. We shouldn't just ignore them, but we should understand the way they make us feel and accept that, that's okay to feel upset or unhappy about the way the world is. However, we also must pay attention to the goodness that humanity does offer. She wants everybody to know this fact. I'd say this is the main message in the whole poem, that humanity is good, does have the potential for goodness, and this can provide a lot of strength. Again, this is reflected in this tiny stanza where she says, man aspires to good, to love, sighs. Perhaps what she's doing here is suggesting that love is the counterpart to melancholy. You know, if we can love, if we can overcome evil and not become part of the evil, then we have a chance at creating a better world. And even in the darkest moments of life, when one is dying in their own blood, it is possible to raise an eye and scream the words love and love. So this really shows the power of love and the strength and kind of battle that we need to engage in to overcome negativity and evil. The human spirit is our strongest weapon. And at the end of this stanza, she says that it's man's virtue that needs explaining, not his failing. Now, this is quite an interesting 2 lines, because we often focus on our negative elements and we explain how we should improve. She's saying that we shouldn't do that, and we should actually focus on all the things that we do that are beautiful and that we should be proud of, our virtues rather than our failings. And then finally, she finishes with that refrain once again: away melancholy, away with it, let it go. And so the mantra becomes full circle. Okay, if you fancy pausing the video at this stage and completing this activity, all you need to do is use the annotations on the screen now and put them in the right place, labeling the lines in the poem with the comments around the poem. So you have to kind of match them up, and I've color coded them to make it a little bit easier. So why don't you pause the video now and have a go at doing this, and in a second I will reveal all the answers. Okay, so I'll just talk you through them very briefly. So at the beginning, the first couple of lines and that refrain that we keep seeing all the way through, there's a kind of tone of annoyance here, like she's belittling melancholy, shooing it like an annoying fly. Away melancholy, away with it, let it go. And then we see these verbs that I mentioned at the start: blowing, flowing, leaping. We've got this sort of imagery of energy and power. The O sound really extends the sensation of flowing and blowing. The rhyme gives it a flow in itself. Then we get this tone of humour again through the carrieth of his meat, which uplifts the reader's spirit, perhaps. She then uses asyndeton, which is where she omits any conjunctions like and or so or because. And man too hurries, eats, couples berries, perhaps mirrors how fast life goes. Again, she continues with the jolly tone, with the hey ho. You get this refrain again all the way through: away melancholy, away melancholy. And it feels like a mantra or a chant or some kind of reminder, constant reminder of that we should get rid of this feeling as much as we can. And then she moves on to talk about why or how we can get rid of this feeling, and that's by focusing on the positives and by acknowledging human goodness is as strong spiritually as a god could be. She says, again, speak not to me of tears, tyranny, pox, wars. It's kind of a barrage of different negative influences in our life. And then the final few stanzas, there's a really short stanza, that little 4-line stanza. The whole poem's kind of message, I think, is captured in those 4 lines. And then again, we've got this very destructive imagery. It sort of mirrors the tyranny and the pox and the wars. We've got beated, corrupted, dying in his own blood. So very brutal, destructive, ominous language there. However, the thing that can defeat those things is love, which she repeats in the final stanza. And again, the final few lines, it's man's virtue that we all need to break down and analyze rather than man's failing. And perhaps if we do that, we can learn about the good things in life. There are a few essay questions here, and I would encourage you to have a go at writing one. I've posted a couple of example essays with my previous presentations. I think there was one for the City Planners by Atwood. And so if you want to have a look at a model example of a different essay and then have a go at recreating your own essay for this poem, you could choose one of these questions to explore and challenge yourself to write an essay. Thanks very much for listening. I hope this helped, and I will see you next time on Tangled Up in Poetry.